So we are moving on from all the sciencey stuff. What are some of the, I'm just going to do a quick review. What are some of the arguments against, that we looked at against evolution? We just looked at them the last couple of weeks. Anybody? We have notes. The one is a fossil record. That is big. And even you can read many, many quotes. I don't have a new sheet. I'll have it for next week. I'm sorry.
Well, I don't have an argument. I have a question. Since before the flood, every animals and insects were way bigger than they were now because the oxygen levels were high. Do you also think humans were also way bigger? Like talking about 10 feet tall humans and stuff like that.
I don't know. They've found skeletons of giant people, so I don't know. It's hard to say. There's not going to be a lot of skeletons of people before the flood. You're not going to find many of them, just to be honest with you. So that's one thing. But so one of the big ones is the fossil record. Evolutionists even admit, and Darwin himself said, we should find what? Graduated. We should find all these transitional forms and convert into the next form. And they said, we don't see that. We see that we find them starting out fully formed, the way they are, and little change, and then if they go extinct, they're no longer there. We don't see transitional forms. The fossil record, it does not prove evolution, it proves creationism. So that's one of them. What's another one?
I'll only tell you, when you get a hot day, and these bugs come out of nowhere, they don't take billions of years to come out. Where do they
Okay.
come from?
Mosquitoes. That's it. No. You guys have no idea. I lived in the tropics, and it was no winter to kill the mosquitoes, and it was just constant. I mean, you guys have no idea. I remember one time I looked down, I was getting bitten. I whacked them. I killed 3 mosquitoes with one swat. You have no idea what mosquitoes. We have mosquito coils if we're outside. We have to burn stuff, so it kills all the mosquitoes. We got it pretty good here than where I used to live. Genetic limits, okay? Darwin didn't realize there's genetic limits. You just can't keep, we learned that with dogs, and we breed certain animals. You just can't keep putting tall people together and then we just go up to 12, 14 feet and just infinitely and make giants, okay? There's a genetic limit to that. You start to have problems when you hit the genetic limits of that. He didn't realize that at the time. Another one is cyclical change. Okay, we see changes, that's microevolution in species, okay, but it's cyclical. It'll go up and come back, and we notice with the beaks, the Darwin finches, that's their big evidence is that the beaks changed, okay, and that must prove we can go from an amoeba to a human because the beaks change. What they find is it's cyclical. They change back according to the weather. It does not create new species. Irreducible complexity, okay, if you have a mousetrap, it have 5 parts. If you take one part out, what happens? It doesn't work, okay? And what they have to try to prove is how each part evolved and kept. You not only had to have a mutation, which is usually harmful, which doesn't create new information, but somehow they get this part, and then somebody else has to have that in order for it to get to breed. And then you have to have these 4 parts that are totally useless, and then until the 5th part comes and suddenly it works. Okay, and that's not how things work. Survival of the fittest would actually get rid of those extraneous things that have no purpose. They'd be picked off if they're carrying around all these extra parts that do nothing, okay, that would go against their view of survival of the fittest. So irreducible complexity. Non-viability of transitional forms, okay? If you think about it, if I'm supposedly evolving from an arm to a wing, okay, what's going to happen when you're halfway there? You're going to get eaten, yes. It's going to work against you because you no longer have a functioning arm and you can't fly, okay? You're really going to get picked off. You're not going to get there. It's useless. If you can't use it as an arm, you can't use it it has to be fully formed a wing, okay, fully formed feathers in order for it to work. it's just amazing. I'm amazed when you study how complex things are, just the way the structures of birds and feathers and just everything is just so finely engineered. If everything's not perfect, it doesn't work. Okay, even I was reading, and I can't remember exactly, something with the peregrine falcon, how fast it goes, and it has something in its nose, so it's like that keeps it from passing out. Like it's just amazing. It's like we have it in our jet turbines, it's just amazing engineering, but transitional forms would not survive. So that's just some of the arguments against evolution. Now, if you're not a scientific person, we are moving off the science, so there's plenty of scientific arguments, and we're not even getting into all of them. Somebody was showing me a video back there of a comedian making a joke about evolution, and I think what you're starting to see, I was just thinking about it. They had complete control of information. Really, they had public schools and then colleges, and that's your main source of information, and they're getting fed that stuff. You can't even, they can't even teach the opposing view, an alternative view, because that's religious, even if we just did all this scientific argument. Did we bring God into it? No, because there is evidence of God creating things. If God did it, then we see it, and we're looking at just the evidence, but they want to say, oh, it's religious, and we can't have that, so they don't want any competition, any competing ideas they want to shut down. But what you're finding is the internet is a lot of people are going to alternative sources and getting, internet, and I'm finding more and more people, you think more and more people become atheists, right? More and more people would stop believing in God as science progresses, but that's not really the case. Science is really proving that we were created, proving God and creation, and a lot of people are doubting it and starting to get their information from, they kind of had a control on information, but now with the internet, people are starting to wake up a little bit from what I've seen. But we're going to look at standards, the moral argument here. This is one of the authors, Frank, said my friend Dave and I were just finishing dinner at a dockside restaurant in Portland, Maine, when the conversation turned to religion. I don't think one religion can be exclusively true, Dave said, but it seems like you, Frank, have found a center. You have found something that's true for you, and I think that's great. What do you get there? It's your truth, okay? That's what they want to say. There is no truth. You found your truth. Playing along with the premise that something can be true for one person but not another, I asked Dave, what's true for you? What makes life meaningful for you? He said, making money and helping people. Now, Dave is a very successful businessman, so I pressed him a little bit more. I said, Dave, I know CEOs who have reached the pinnacle of business success. They planned and achieved great things in their business life, but have planned nothing and achieved little in their personal lives. They're now facing retirement, and they're asking themselves, now what? Dave agreed and added, yeah, and I know that most of those CEOs have experienced nasty divorces, mostly because they ignored their families in pursuit of a buck. But I'm not like that. I will not sacrifice my family for money, and in my business, I want to help people as well. I commend him for his commitment to his family and his desire to help people, but questions still remained. Why should we be faithful to our families? Who said we should help people? Is helping people a universal moral obligation, or is it true for you but not for me? And to what end should you help them? Financially, emotionally, physically, spiritually? I said, Dave, if there's no objective standard, then life is nothing more than a glorified Monopoly game. You can acquire lots of money and lots of property, but when the game is over, it's all going back in the box. Is that what life is all about? Uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation, Dave quickly changed the subject. But his sense that he ought to help people was correct. He had just no way of justifying it. Okay, a lot of people, we were on a Christian Western culture's value. They have that, but we've moored from the foundation. We've gone away from the foundation, and they don't know why. Why did he think he should help people? Where did he get such an idea, and why do you and I deep down agree with him? Most of us would say, hey, that's right, we should help others. We know that from the Bible. Stop and think on that point for a minute. Aren't you just like Dave? Don't you have this deep-seated sense of obligation that we all ought to help people? We all do. Why? Why do most human beings seem to have that intuitive sense that they ought to do good and shun evil? Behind the answers to those questions is more evidence for a theistic God. This evidence is not scientific. It's what we've seen in previous chapters, but moral in nature. So we've looked at a lot of scientific arguments. We're looking at natural arguments. Like the laws of logic and mathematics, this evidence is non-material, but it's just as real. The reason we believe we ought to do good rather than evil. The reason we, like Dave, believe we should help people is because there's a moral law that has been written on our hearts. In other words, there's a prescription to do good that has been given to all humanity. Some call this moral prescription a conscience. Others call it natural law. Others, like the founding fathers, refer to it as nature's law. We refer to it as the moral law. Whatever you call it, the fact that a moral standard has been prescribed on the minds of all human beings points to a moral law prescriber. Okay? Every prescription has a prescriber. The moral law is no different. Someone must have given us these moral obligations. Okay? And they want to say, well, you know, it's just we evolved this thing to help people. Actually, evolution is against this. Okay, I had a rabid science teacher who was a rabid evolutionist, and we were on a camping trip, and he's out there, and he just, out of the blue, he goes, you know, we're the only species that takes care of the sick and the elderly and doesn't let them die. And that's all he said. I'm like, okay, yeah, yeah. Well, the animals, they're not, you know, they can't take care of the sick and the elderly and the slow in the herd. They get picked off. That's natural. That's survival of the fittest, right? We're really going against survival of the fittest, so it doesn't really help us to care for all those that are sick and, you know, can't keep up. And yeah, they nurture their young, but you watch them when it's, you know, a lot of them, you know, it goes against survival. It's really, what is survival of the fittest? It's all really about me and whatever I got to do. And if this person's holding me back, well, then I don't care about them. It's survival of the fittest. This person's not fit. Okay? That's really, and if you look at what Hitler did, okay, Hitler killed Jews, but he also, because he thought they were an inferior race, but he also killed disabled people, and he thought, I'm purifying the race. And when you take atheism evolution to its extent, that's what you get. So we're really going against evolutionary principles in what we do in helping people. Some call this, but whatever you call it, the fact that a moral standard has been prescribed on the minds of all human beings points to a moral law prescriber. I already said that. Every prescription has a prescriber. The moral law is our third argument for the existence of a theistic God. Can anybody tell me the other two arguments? The cosmological and teleological arguments. So it goes like this. Every law has a lawgiver. There is a moral law. Therefore, there is a moral lawgiver. If the first and second premises are true, then the conclusion necessarily follows. Of course, every law has a lawgiver. There can be no legislation unless there's a legislature. And sometimes I wish there wasn't. We don't really need them. I don't know what they do. They just make dumb laws, especially in New York State. I'm like, if you just guys did nothing, we would be a lot better off. We don't need any new laws. But anyway, moreover, if there are moral obligations, there must be somebody that we're obligated to. Okay? But is it really true that there is a moral law? We look at our founding fathers, they thought so. Thomas Jefferson wrote in the Declaration of Independence, he said, nature's law is self-evident. You don't use reason to discover, you just know it. Okay, these are brilliant people. What are they saying? It's just common sense, okay? Just like when you look at Mount Rushmore, it's just common sense that somebody created that, somebody designed that. You could just see that, you know, you don't need to go back and, you know, it's just common sense. We just see it, it's self-evident. But perhaps that's why Dave hit a roadblock in his thinking. He knew helping people was the right thing to do, but he couldn't explain why without appealing to a standard outside himself. Okay, you can have moral atheists, but they can't tell you why it's right. Okay, they can't tell you what the standard is that they're getting it from. Okay? It's just their opinion. Without an objective standard of meaning and morality, then life is meaningless. There's nothing absolutely right or wrong. Everything is merely a matter of opinion. And I'm not sure when this book was written, but I'm sure it was written before all the craziness that we have now. And it's just shocking that we have to make an executive order that there is only male and female. I mean, I'm just like, if you would have asked Miss Nancy, if you asked you as a kid, saying, one day the president has to make this announcement for boys not to go in girls' bathrooms and there's only male and female, like, you would have laughed. You would have thought that's crazy. But that's where we're at, is we have to say the obvious. And, anyway, they did a study. They polled people, like 80% are for it, and 20%, 80% agree that there are only two genders. It's a 80-20 issue, but these people are just pushing this craziness stuff because why? Everything's relative. There is no truth. It's whatever you want. When we say the moral law exists, we mean that all people are impressed with the fundamental sense of right and wrong. Everyone knows, for example, that love is superior to hate, and that courage is better than cowardice. I love that. They got to put it on the helmets and everything. Choose love. Okay, it's like, okay, who's not? Who's choosing hate? But we already know that. University of Texas at Austin professor Jay Budziszewski writes, everyone knows certain principles. There is no land where murder is virtue and gratitude is vice. C.S. Lewis, who has written profoundly on this topic in his classic work, Mere Christianity, put it this way. Think of a country where people were admired for running away in battle, or where a man felt proud of double-crossing all the people who had been kindest to him. You might as well imagine a country where 2 and 2 made 5. Okay? It doesn't exist. In other words, everyone knows there are absolute moral obligations. An absolute moral obligation is something that is binding on all people at all times in all places. And an absolute moral law implies an absolute moral lawgiver. Okay, that's where we get into truth. One of the principles of truth is true for all people, all places, all cultures, all times. Okay, you ask, I've seen people, college students interviewed, and they go, is rape wrong? They can't even say that. Well, in our culture it is, they'll say, but some cultures it may be okay. And it just blows my mind that they can't even say. It's just plainly, we know it's wrong, but that's where it leads moral relativism. Now, this does not mean that every moral issue has easily recognizable answers, or that some people don't deny that absolute morality exists. There are different problems in morality, and people suppress and deny the moral law every day, okay? So people will suppress it, okay? People will say it's not there. It simply means there are basic principles of right and wrong that everyone knows whether they will admit them or not. Budziszewski calls this basic knowledge of right and wrong what we can't not know in this book by that title. And you see people and they're interviewing them, and it's just plain, they just ask them a simple question, and because of this moral relativism, they just can't answer it because of their worldview. And it's just like everybody knows, but they can't give you the straight answer. We can't not know, for example, that it's wrong to kill innocent human beings for no reason. Some people may deny it and commit murder anyway, but deep in their heart, they know murder is wrong. Okay, I'm not saying people don't do wrong. I'm saying deep down, most people know it's wrong. Even serial killers know murder is wrong. They just may not feel remorse. Okay, they may not feel bad about it, but they know it's wrong. Okay, and so I'm not saying people don't do wrong. I'm saying people know it's wrong, but they do it anyway. And like all absolute moral laws, murder is wrong for everyone, everywhere, in America, India, Zimbabwe, and every country now and forever. That's what the moral law tells every human heart. That's really what they're trying to do with abortion. Okay, deep down, people know it's wrong. They're trying to tell them it's okay. This is Freud's argument. Some of the problems in society is your guilt. Okay, if we can get rid of guilt and tell you every behavior is okay, then you'll feel better. Okay, but what happened? People still feel bad. They still feel guilty. I watch clips of people and they're standing there with a sign that said abortion is murder, and people just go ballistic and they attack them. Why? They probably had an abortion, they probably feel guilty, and they lash out. If they know deep down in their heart that it's okay, they wouldn't get upset. Okay? If somebody said, if helping the poor, and somebody said helping the poor is wrong, I'm not going to get upset at them. I know it's right. You don't have to convince me. Your sign isn't going to change me. Okay? I think you're a little crazy if you had that sign. I'm not going to attack that person, but what is it? It's guilt. Somebody said maybe you feel guilty because you did something wrong. Okay? So, how do we know moral law exists? There are many reasons we know the moral law exists. We will look at 8 of them. Some of these reasons overlap one another, but we'll discuss them in this order. The moral law is undeniable. We know it by our reactions. It is the basis of human rights. It is an unchanging standard of justice. It defines a real difference between moral positions. For example, Mother Teresa versus Hitler. Since we know what's absolutely wrong, there must be an absolute standard of rightness. The moral law is the grounds for political and social dissent. And number 8, if there were no moral law, then we wouldn't make excuses for violating it. Okay? So number 1, the moral law is undeniable. Relativists usually make 2 primary truth claims. Number 1, there is no absolute truth. Okay? What's wrong with that argument? Self-defeating. Are you absolutely sure that's true? Okay, but they'll say that, and it's just a self-defeating claim. And number 2, there are no absolute moral values. And why do people want to believe this? Because I can do whatever I want. If there's no absolute moral values, you can't make me feel bad. It's just Freud, next generation of Freud. There's no wrong. I can do whatever I want. I'm not going to feel guilty. I can... and they're still going to hit the consequences of those actions, okay? It's going to be, but they want to feel good about it, okay? In the end, they don't, because they still have a conscience. They still know it's empty and it's not right, but they want to convince themselves it's okay. If there really is no absolute truth, then their absolute claim that there is no absolute truth can't be true. You can see that relativist statement is irrational because it affirms exactly what he is trying to deny. Okay, we just mentioned that. They're saying, I have an absolute, one thing I know absolutely for sure is true is there's no absolute truth, okay? Even Joseph Fletcher, the father of modern situation ethics, fell into this trap. In his book, Situation Ethics, Fletcher insisted that the situationist avoids words like never and perfect and always as he avoids the plague, as he avoids absolutely. So what are they just trying to do? Just not say the word. Of course, this is the same as claiming one should never say never, or we should always avoid using the word always, okay? But these statements do not avoid what they say we must avoid. Relativists are absolutely sure there are no absolutes, okay? So this is just a flawed argument, and you'll find intelligent people saying it. They're just trying to say, don't actually say it, but don't actually say it, Don't use those words, use different words. Like absolute truth, absolute values are undeniable. While the claim there are no absolute values is not self-defeating, the existence of absolute values is practically undeniable. For the person who denies all values, values his right to deny them. Further, he wants everyone to value him as a person, even while he denies that there are values for all persons. Okay? This was illustrated clearly a number of years ago when Norm was speaking to a group of affluent, well-educated Chicago suburbanites. After I suggested that there are such things as objective moral values to which we all have an obligation, one lady stood and protested loudly. There are no real values. It's all a matter of taste and opinion. I resisted the temptation to make my point by shouting, "Sit down and shut up, you egghead. Who wants to hear your opinion?" He did not say that, of course. If I had been so rude and discourteous, she would have rightly complained that I had violated her right to her opinion and her right to express it. To which I could have replied, "You have no such right. You just told me such right doesn't exist." So what I'm saying, there's no values, but I want to be treated with value. Okay? And if he would have said that, she would have been upset, disproving her point. Her complaint would have proved that she actually believed in a real absolute value. She valued her right to say there are no absolute values. In other words, even those who deny all values nevertheless value their right to make that denial. I know it's complicated, but I'll say it again. In other words, even those who deny all values nevertheless value their right to make that denial. Okay, if he would have said, "Shut up, I don't want to listen," she would have said, "I have the right to do this, I can do it." And therein lies the inconsistency. Moral values are practically undeniable. Number two, our reactions help us discover the moral law, right from wrong. In the above scenario, the lady's reaction would have reminded her that there are absolute moral values. A professor at a major university in Indiana gave one of his relativistic students the same experience not long ago. The professor, who was teaching a class in ethics, assigned a term paper to his students. He told the students to write on any ethical topic of their choice, requiring each student only to properly back up his or her thesis with reasons and documentation. One student, an atheist, wrote eloquently on the topic of moral relativism. He argued, "All morals are relative. There is no absolute standard of justice, of rightness. It's all a matter of opinion. You like chocolate, I like vanilla," and so on. His paper provided both his reasons and his documentations. It was the right length on time, stylishly presented in a handsome blue folder. After the professor read the entire paper, he wrote on the front cover, "F, I don't like blue folders." When the student got the paper back, he was enraged. He stormed into the professor's office and protested, "F, I don't like blue folders. That's not fair. That's not right. That's not just. You didn't grade the paper on its merits." Okay, what did he see where it's leading? Raising his hand to quiet the bombastic student, the professor calmly retorted, "Wait a minute, hold on. I read a lot of papers. Let me see. Wasn't your paper the one that said there is no such thing as fairness, rightness, and justice?" "Yes," the student answered. "Then what's this you say about me not being fair, right, and just?" The professor asked, "Didn't your paper argue it's all a matter of taste? You like chocolate, I like vanilla." The student replied, "Yes, that's my view." "Fine then," the professor responded. "I don't like blue, you get an F." Okay? Suddenly the light bulb went on in the student's head. He realized he really did believe in moral absolutes. He at least believed in justice. After all, he was charging the professor with injustice for giving him an F simply because of the color of the folder. That simple fact defeated his entire case for relativism. Okay, so when you put it in practice, there's no right or wrong until somebody does something you think is wrong, then your reaction shows you believe in it. The moral of the story is there are absolute morals. And if you really want to get relativists to admit it, all you need to do is treat them unfairly. Their reactions will reveal the moral law written on their hearts and minds. Okay? A lot of people, these people are easily offended, you'll find. Okay? Their moral relativist is no right and wrong, but if you don't do what you want, they're going to be really upset at you. Here the student realized there is an objective standard of rightness by how he reacted to the professor's treatment of him. In the same way, I may not think stealing is wrong when I steal from you, but watch how morally outraged when somebody steals from us, right? Suddenly stealing is wrong. So it's not that people don't break the moral code or they don't know that it's wrong. It's when you do it back to them, then their reaction really shows they don't believe you, or they don't believe what they're saying. Our reactions also indicate that relativism is ultimately unlivable. People may claim they are relativists, but would they accept the morality of murder or rape if someone wanted to murder or rape them? Of course not. Relativism contradicts our reactions and our common sense. Okay? Well, murder's wrong in our culture, but if they went to another culture and somebody murdered a loved one, they would think that was wrong. They wouldn't say, oh, that's okay, that's just their culture. Oh, that's, they would be outraged that it happened. Okay, so that's the test. It's not by what we do, it's about what happens when it happens to us and our reaction to it. Reactions even help us identify right and wrong as a nation. When Muslim terrorists flew our planes into our buildings with our innocent loved ones, our emotional reaction fit the immensity of the crime. Our reaction reinforced the truth that the act was absolutely wrong. Some may say, but bin Laden and his fellow criminals thought the act was morally right. That's partially because they were not on the receiving end of the crime. Okay, how do you think bin Laden would have reacted if we had flown his planes into his building and his innocent loved ones in them? He would have known immediately that such an act was undeniably wrong. There was recently, about a year ago, everybody remember the letter from bin Laden, and all these people are like sympathizing with him, and he wrote some letter and it got published on the internet, and I'm like, I'm just in shock that people are thinking, oh, he's valid for what he did, or he had a motivation, okay? But if it happened to him, he would be upset because he would know it was wrong. So the moral law is not always apparent from our actions, as evidenced by the terrible thing human beings do to one another. So people will say, well, there's no moral law. Look what people do to each other. Okay, obviously they don't have consciences. It's not by what we do, because we go against our conscience. We do things that are wrong, that we know are wrong, because we're sinful. Okay? But by our reactions. But it's brightly revealed in our reactions what we do when we are personally treated unfairly. Okay? So you can hold that view, there's no right and wrong, but you can't then get upset when somebody does something to you. Okay? Because there's no right and wrong. Somebody kills your loved one, well, who's to say murder's wrong? That's just your opinion. That's why when you get these I used to listen to talk radio, and they start arguing about these, is this right or wrong? Well, it's all opinion. There's never going to get to a right answer. It's just everybody's opinion. Well, it's not based on biblical truth, because it's all subjective. It's like you can argue all day, and that's what they do. I think it's okay. I think it's right. I think it's wrong. It's just all your opinions, because you've said there's no right and wrong. In other words, the moral law is not always the standard by which we treat others, but it is nearly always the standard by which we expect others to treat us. I'm going to read that again. The moral law is not always the standard by which we treat others. It is nearly always the standard by which we expect others to treat us. It does not describe how we actually behave, but rather it prescribes how we ought to behave. Isn't it amazing that criminals, and then somebody rats them out, and how morally outraged they are, it's just like, how could they do that? They turn me in, where's their loyalty, and it's like, they would do that too. They would kill people, they'll do anything's okay, but, somebody does something to them, well, it's just moral outrage. We got to take care of this guy. Can you believe what he did? Well, kind of hypocrisy, but they realize that there's a sense of it's by their reaction when it's done to them. I'm just going to leave it there, but just some things to think about, some of the moral law. Okay, we looked at some of them. The first, every law has a lawgiver. There is a moral law, therefore there is a moral lawgiver. Yep. Okay, so just another proof that God exists. We looked at the moral law is undeniable, and we know it by our reactions. Okay, that's how you test somebody. Punch a moral relativist that says nothing's wrong. Punch him in the face. Don't really do that, but you punch them in the face. What are they going to be? Outraged. Okay, they can say all day, I don't believe there's right and wrong, but until you do something to them, then suddenly they believe that's wrong, and they're going to get very easily very upset at you because they do believe some things are intrinsically wrong. There is a right and wrong when it's done to them. You can tell by somebody's reaction to it. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we love you, dear Lord. We just thank you for creating us, dear Lord, and giving us your word and giving us a conscience written on our hearts, dear Lord, a moral law and standard to live by, dear Lord. We just pray that we would follow it, dear Lord, and follow your word. We love you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, you are dismissed.